Redefining Medtech shares the stories of clinicians, executives, inventors, entrepreneurs, and researchers who are transforming healthcare through the development of medical technology. Through our in-depth interviews, digital health leaders will share their journeys, offering you insights into cutting-edge technologies and how to integrate them into your practice. This is Redefining Medtech. I am excited to welcome Dr. Felicity Harper, an NIH-funded investigator, professor, and licensed clinical psychologist whose research spawned the development of My Patient Pal, a digital app designed to track and manage cancer patients' treatment, side effects, and medication. Welcome to MedTech. I'm excited to welcome Dr. Felicity Harper, who is a renowned professor and licensed clinical psychologist and the new developer of a new app. So we're looking forward to hearing all about that. So why don't we go back and hear a little bit about your background and education and how you got inspired to do what you're doing today.
I actually started in college and I was doing studio art and political science. I thought I was going to be a lawyer. And as it turned out, that wasn't quite what I decided I wanted to do. So I was about out of school for about 7 years, and I ended up going to grad school for psychology. I thought that would be something that sort of sparked my interest. So I took some classes, sort of decided to see how that went, and as it turned out, I really loved it. So I got my PhD in clinical psychology. I first started doing family violence. That was really my focus in graduate school. And then I had a friend who had cancer, so it was about my third year of grad school, and I had a friend who got breast cancer at age 28. And after that, I sort of really had this idea that wanting to make a difference with people who were in these life-threatening conditions, and really sort of starting to understand that put a face on it for me. And so what I sort of took was my background in family history and family relationships and merged that with health. So that once I had my PhD, I went on and I did some training in a field that's called psycho-oncology, which is basically clinical psychologists working with cancer patients, really to help them sort of with their emotional functioning and their mental health while they're going through this whole process. And that was what brought me to where my current position today, where I'm at Wayne State University and Karmanos Cancer Institute in Detroit. So, I'm kind of in the unique position as both a clinician and a researcher. So as a faculty member, I have a research appointment, and then I also actually have a clinical practice where I see therapy patients once a week in the cancer center. And it was sort of really through that work that I sort of better started to understand the difficulties that cancer patients go through, and in particular during the course of treatment. So I had a lot of patients that would come to me, and rather than being able to focus on just the treatment, there was kind of all these ancillary issues that they were dealing with. A variety of different things, obviously, like dealing with family and dealing with their job, dealing with how they were going to pay for treatment. But I think one of the things that really, really struck me was that it was just the treatment itself, and the side effects was what really seemed to be plaguing people. So they would come in and say, well, I have pain, or I have nausea, or I have fatigue, and as a result, I can't go back to work, or as a result, I can't take care of my kids. And I think it was sort of understanding that patients had a lot of these symptoms that doctors didn't always know about, because what happens is that patients will come, they'll see their doctor maybe once a month or every 3 weeks while they're on treatment, but there's all this stuff that's kind of going on at home. And I think that was sort of really where I got the idea of My Patient Pal, is really sort of at that particular juncture of seeing that I could do something.
So you had the inspiration to develop this. So take us along that journey and what steps you took and how you built your, the team around you to be able to do that.
So in the program that I'm in now, I'm very fortunate in that it's population studies and disparities research, is that we are a team of epidemiologists, psychologists, and communication scientists. So our program by nature is very multidisciplinary. Then as being a clinician myself, I'm also then seeing patients right along with the oncologist. And so I think for me that became kind of a natural integration of being able to put together a team. So back in 2007, one of the oncologists and I were having a discussion, and she was saying to me, when we have patients, and she was talking about phase 1 treatment, which is where patients are very ill, it's sort of the last treatment option for patients. And she was saying to me, here's the thing, is that I can look at all the markers, I can look at toxicities, I can look at imaging, I can look at their labs, and I can tell how they're doing, but I don't really quite understand how they feel. And she said, I really feel like there's a gap there, is that I kind of want to know this from patients, but she said, I'm an oncologist. How do I figure out how to measure this? So I'm a clinical psychologist. I said, I know how to measure this. So we put together sort of a pilot project, sort of seeing how we could start working with this. And it was so long ago, so 2007, so what we used initially were actually Palm pilots. So that was a while ago, and we contracted with a company. The only company we could find to do it was based in Belgium, because it was sort of at the advent of using technology in health in this way. So we really started there with that project, and that was at the very infancy. And then from there, we kind of decided that we were going to be able to look at what would happen if now we looked at phase 2 patients. And so we applied for a grant, and by the time the grant got funded, it was iPads. Actually, I think we were going to use BlackBerries, but by the time the grant got funded, it was actually iPads. So, and there weren't really, smartphones weren't as ubiquitous, right, as prevalent as they are now. So sort of along the course of time, we actually can downsize it enough that we could actually put it on an app on people's phones. And I think one of the hallmarks of things that is different about this app is that it's evidence-based. So that we know if you go look on, say, for example, the Apple Store, or if you go to Android, there are thousands of health-based apps, but that the research would show us that there's been a review of apps is that they're not really based on any science, so that anyone can develop an app, and that's great, but I think the critical feature here, particularly when you have patients, and you want to make sure that you're doing things that are protecting patients. You want to make sure that you're, both that your app is doing what it says it would do, and also that it's safe. So the research was showing that of a lot of the current apps, either they hadn't consulted providers, they hadn't consulted patients, and that sometimes, in some instances, the apps actually had advice that should have been counter to what the patient should have been doing. So that was really the process that I worked through in terms of developing my app. Was I worked with a technology transfer program to develop the wireframes, and what I really used was what's called a design, test, redesign. And it's a very iterative process where at first I went and talked to patients, I talked to providers about my ideas, and they said, yeah, I think this will work, or maybe that won't work. So we redesigned it, thought it through again, and then I started working with a software development firm that was able to really, it was a firm, Crosscom, which they really had a vision of wanting to be able to partner with researchers to develop apps that could have an impact on patients. It was a really important thing for them, and so it was this really back and forth process with them. And then they ended up helping me develop the app, and then we took it back to patients and providers, and now we have a final prototype. So it's actually available on the App Store and for Android users.
How many patients are utilizing this right now?
Well, in the current trial that we have, I think we're almost up to 10 patients. And so what happens is that patients put this on their smartphone, and we actually have them use it for 8 weeks. So and what it is it's a daily report of their side effects and also the medication they're using.
Are they varied ages?
Yeah, we have all different ages, races, ethnicities, educational backgrounds.
Technology ability?
Technology, it's very interesting. When we first started this with the Palm pilots, we had people who said, well, what's this? They'd never seen one before. And
with or without a stylus?
we had to give them a stylus.
Right.
That was a long time ago. And we were able to train them in 5 to 10 minutes how to use it. And so what patients do then is that they just log on and make a report once a day. So because we're following patients for such a long period of time, for 8 weeks, what that means is that we have a lot of data. Because we have the daily data, we don't need to have as many patients in order to be able to test the feasibility and the acceptability. So this current trial we're about to close, we're recruiting and we'll close out, will be with 60 patients. And so what we did was we had the wireframes, we had the app. Then what we ended up doing was the acceptability testing. So we gave it to patients, providers, said, hey, what do you think? Let's use this. Now what we're doing is called feasibility and testing and utility. So basically how well they're using it, how useful they find it. And our next phase, which right now I'm applying for grants for NIH, is to do a randomized controlled trial with it. So then we'll actually randomize people to use the app or not.
So in terms of the intake, what kind of questions are you asking them, and what are you looking for? Is it to provide the information back to the provider that they know how they're doing on their medication, they know how they're feeling and how things are going at home, or will some of this information be shared with the pharmaceutical manufacturers who are providing their chemotherapy? So all of it?
Yeah, so
Okay.
Again, I think one of the things I would say that's sort of different about the process with my app is that in addition to it being evidence-based, we've used a very empirical development process. The other novel thing about it is that we actually collect the data on the back end. So unlike, say, for example, an app that you would go on and somebody, you or I, would say, oh, I want to track my fitness, and I'm going to use that app, the data for that is kept on your phone. So it doesn't go anywhere else. And so kind of the novelty of this app is that the ability to both use it as a tool for patients as well as a kind of a clinical tool, but also being able to use it for research. So in an earlier, before we developed the app and we still had it online, it was web-based, we worked with a pharmaceutical company who said, okay, I have this drug, but we're getting this particular side effect profile. So we don't know why in the very beginning some of the patients are having this particular side effect. And what happens is that when they have that side effect, they come off treatment. And obviously what we want is if a patient is on treatment, we want to keep them on the treatment. And so part of my app is really being able to sort of manage some of those side effects. And for them in particular, because we were able to collect the data, we were able to develop trajectories over time and say, all right, here are the different side effects. We can start to tell where they're starting to peak and where they're starting to ebb, and how this differs. Like, for example, prostate cancer patients were different than breast cancer patients. So with that data, we were able to provide that information back to them, because the data is all there. So I can provide it to, we can make it available to providers, we can make it available to pharmaceutical companies, we can use the data and write publications off of it. So that makes it also a little bit different, is that it has a back-end research piece to it.
So there's other applications that are out there but yours is differentiated because of this particular component.
Correct.
Of it. So
yeah.
There's no other app out there at the moment that you are aware of?
I would say, in particular with this particular app, no. I would say that's the case, yeah.
And do you have a patent on this particular?
No, I don't. We have it registered as an invention. It can't be quite a patent.
But the process of which the intake is happening and then the output, okay.
So what the app does is basically at the very beginning, the first time the patient logs in, is that they're just asked about, they can personalize it and develop what and say, these are the symptoms I want to track. These are the medications I want to track. So it's, you don't have to go through a whole list of things that aren't particularly relevant to you. And they're able to enter their own dosages of, this is the dose of my medication, this is what I'm doing. So that every day when they go back and log in, it's not a new process every day. They're prompted by, these are the symptoms you said you wanted to track, these are the medications. And it takes them about 5 minutes to do it every day.
Are they compliant?
Yeah. So, we've had patients stay on this for up to 4 months, and in fact, when we tell them the study's over, they want to keep doing it. And I think, for patients, it's an ability to kind of see their own patterns of symptoms as well as their medication use. But I also think for patients, it's the idea that someone's listening to them. That if I record this, someone wants to know how I feel. It's not just that I'm a nameless patient, I go into a cancer center. I've got treatment and I see the doctor every 3 or 4 weeks. It's that, someone's actually paying attention to this information. And one of the features that we've really added here on this app is that you can look at summaries, so patients can look over the last 7 days or the last 30 days. There's a charting feature so that they can actually see, as I said, for their symptoms and their medications, which earlier versions didn't have. In a lot of ways, it was geared a lot more for the providers, is that, okay, this is what your patient's quality of life looks like, this is what their symptom profile looks like, and we realized along the way, we really aren't giving anything to patients. So if we're gonna make this into a smartphone app, something that's easily portable, patients can do anywhere, as long as they have a smartphone app, kind of seems to me like maybe we ought to give something back to the patients. And I really think that the landscape of care is changing, particularly for cancer patients, that as we have more oral cancer agents, what ends up happening is that patients then don't come back to the cancer center as frequently. So in some ways, they're sort of having to take more of their own care and manage it themselves. So we thought, well, kind of given that we're trying to sort of bridge a little bit of this gap here, what if we give something back to patients but then can also be shared with providers? So really this current incarnation in the development of the app was really about partnering patients and physicians with the same information.
For the patient who isn't having a positive progression, to look back at their cycle of input and see that they are continually regressing. Or just the emotional part, seeing that if there's a question about how they're feeling emotionally that day and they're seeing themselves go down, how do you manage that? How do you deal with that, and how does the oncologist take that information and utilize it?
So, I think that's obviously the case, is that, anytime we monitor behavior in somebody, that people pay more attention to it. That's what it does, is it gives us more awareness. And I think we can't avoid the fact that some people get sicker on treatment. Some people, their treatment is going to fail. I think that's just kind of an eventuality of the process, is that some people are going to do better than others. But I think really for me, the purpose of the tool was to encourage the discussion so that the patient may not be doing as well, but not talking about it with the oncologist. And so I think it's really important that even though this information might be difficult, patients aren't going to get help for it unless they actually have that communication with their physician.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm curious to know how you envision the future of healthcare and what you would like to see in regard to more whether it's applications such as yours or technology and the introduction of AI and how that might interplay with patients in the future. What's your thoughts?
So I think it's really important to start thinking about suites of apps for patients. Obviously one app isn't enough, and I think what would be ideal is that a patient comes into the cancer center and there's a variety of different apps that they can make use of. So maybe there's an app, what we call a question prompt list, is that helps a patient kind of develop a list of questions that they want to ask their physician. Or maybe we need to develop an app that helps patients, what we call a survivorship care plan, is that after treatment, knowing exactly what the treatment regimens were, how much your dose was, who all your providers were, that if we can develop a variety of different things that patients, depending on their needs, can draw from, I think that as a clinician and as a researcher, seeing that we have patients covered that maybe we really wouldn't normally know their needs, is that we can develop things for them all across the continuum. I think that the other really big push is that we're getting so much information, even if all we thought about was wearables, that things, people are wearing on
glucose monitors.
Yes, and all that kind of stuff. We just have an explosion of information. And so some of this, I think, is really thinking about how do we get this into the hands of providers. We can email them the information, we can give them written charts and summaries, but as a clinician, I know that things are busy in the clinic. I'm looking at the EMR, and what I want to be able to see is I want a one-stop shop for all this data that's coming in. Like maybe I don't need to see, someone's physical activity, but if they're having symptom issues, I kind of need to know that. Or if I want to be able to translate information into their survivorship care plan app. So I think really what we're looking at, and I think has been a big barrier and challenge for my research as well as for a lot of other people, has really been how do we get that information integrated into the electronic medical record. Not everybody has the same system. Not every cancer hospital has the same resources. Not everyone has a patient portal. So I think it's really important for us to think about integrating health informatics, our clinical work, our research, and really sort of trying to figure out how we can merge all those things together to take benefit of all of these advances in technology, which people are going to use, but how do we harness it all and put it all together? And I think that's really where we're going in the field and what needs to happen next.
Have you seen any resistance from providers in utilizing this technology in their practice?
I think everybody wants the information when you talk to them about it, but I think it's going back to what I was just saying. And again, as a clinician, I know this, is that they want the information, but now I've got 2 things to look at, or maybe I have 3 things to look at, and I'm trying to keep track of what's going on with this patient. And I can pull labs from here and images from here, but now I've got to get this other information there. And so I wouldn't say there's necessarily pushback, but just trying to sort of figure out how do we make it most efficient in the clinical workflow.
So for the future doctors of America that you teach over at Wayne State, so are they implementing any new technology modalities into their educational programs there? So that way these doctors are ready, and this is not coming from left field. Now granted, these students have grown up with technology and they know it better than any of us.
Right.
So, but is it, in terms of utilization in this realm, is it something that is now being discussed and taught?
So I think that that's an area that is kind of on the cusp. I think that's, as we're developing the tools, wanting to teach incoming physicians and medical education, to infuse that kind of into medical education. I think it's not happening to the extent that it could right now, but I'm also not sure that the field is ready to take these tools, because we need to make sure we have great tools. Then we need to make sure that we understand best how to teach that to them, which I think, again, all sort of based on research, is that we kind of, rather than just teaching something that we don't know is most effective, I think that's kind of the next big piece, is then integrating it into medical education for those that are entering the field.
So you were recently appointed chair of the NIH Risk Health and Healthcare Fellowship Review Panel. So obviously you're very highly respected in your field. Can you share with us a little bit about what that entails?
So I've been serving on that study section for a couple of years, and now I've been in my first year as a chair. And so what we do is that a study section is that we review applications. It's a peer review process. We review applications of people who are up and coming in the field. So it's people who are either graduate students, postdoctoral training. We do medical residents who are seeking a dual degree. But what they're applying for is grants to fund their training, and they have a research project. And one of the fantastic things about it is, sort of coming back to what you were saying, is really the ability to be able to work with people who are up and coming in the field and say, I have an interest in doing this. Well, they have however many people in the room, 30 or 45 people in the room, looking over their application and giving them feedback on, if this is what you want to do, here's a great way to do it. And so it's, as someone who likes to help other people, it's a really great way for us to give back to the field and also to share our wealth of experience, because certainly no one wants us to make the same mistakes that we did. It's a great process. It's scientifically exciting because we hear about new ideas coming into the field. And I think as researchers, to understand how we can best train new researchers in the field. And then I think, as I said, sort of giving back and being able to mentor people. It's just it's an amazing trifecta of interests.
So let's get back to my Patient Pal app. One last question. So at what point do you foresee that this will be rolled out and will be available to all of the cancer patients that are out there?
So as I said, we're currently still in the research phase. It is available. Like, for example, you could go search the iTunes. It's there. Right now it has restricted access in that people have to contact us before we will give them access to it, because we're still collecting the data from it. And we need to know that people are okay with us having their data, so we have to have them sign off on a consent. I think when we have a much better understanding of that, we know that it's effective, we know its utility, my vision for it really is then to make it available to cancer centers so that they can distribute it to their patient. Because right now it's branded with our particular cancer center, but it could be branded with any cancer center. So I think then they would be able to provide it to their patients free of charge, because we don't want patients to have to pay for it. So I think that's kind of how I envision rolling it out. But of course, if someone, as a patient, just wanted to have access to it too, that's something that they'll eventually be able to do. I would guess probably sometime in the next 8 to 10 months.
Oh, wow, sooner than I expected to hear.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, congratulations with everything.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Best of luck with your talk tomorrow.
Thank you.
And look forward to seeing your app widely distributed.
Thank you.
This is Redefining Medtech.